Alright guys, today we are going to have an interesting conversation about some things that were recently said by Phil Spencer and Shuhei Yoshida about VR, and specifically we're going to be focusing on a quote that comes from Phil Spencer and why Xbox isn't really pursuing VR and why it seems like they're not going to. And frankly, I think Phil Spencer's response is absolutely ridiculous, and it makes me think that, a lot of what I've been feeling and thinking about the people who are running the Xbox brand and the direction they're going in, honestly, hearing this response from Phil Spencer in a way kind of confirms my suspicions. It just continually shows and highlights the difference between PlayStation as a brand and Xbox as a brand in 2019 going into 2020. So, it says here that in an interview with Survivor, Phil Spencer pretty flatly said that the main reason for the lack of a VR push for Xbox was that he felt customers on Xbox just weren't that interested in the technology in the same way that fans of other products were. He just doesn't think people see the VR as part of the Xbox brand. So, this is his actual quote. We're going to read it word for word, and let's just read this. He says, "I have some issues with VR. It's isolating, and I think of games as a communal, kind of together experience. We're responding to what our customers are asking for, and nobody's asking for VR. The vast majority of our customers know if they want a VR experience, there's places to go to get those. We see the volumes of those on PC and other places." So that is word for word what Phil Spencer had to say about VR on Xbox. So, in response to that, now, Shuhei Yoshida did not directly tweet at Phil Spencer, but we all know that this was a response to what Phil Spencer had to say, because we know that PlayStation, I believe, is currently the market leader with VR, and it is no doubt a big risk for them. It was a big risk for them to jump headfirst into this market. And Shuhei Yoshida says, "We oftentimes work hard to make things that no customers are asking for." And it's funny because if you look at some of the responses here, some people are highlighting some of the things that, people like Steve Jobs said, quoted with saying, "Some people say give the customers what they want, but that's not my approach. Our job is to figure out what they're going to want before they do." And somebody else also quotes Henry Ford saying, "If I'd asked customers what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. People don't know what they want until you show it to them." And I think that it's important to highlight these quotes because it just goes to show how safe Xbox is playing it anymore. How, first of all, just focusing on Phil Spencer's quote here, him saying he has some problems with VR and then listing one of those problems being he doesn't feel it's communal enough, that's just ridiculous. Like, I don't even know what that even means. Like, there are VR games that are multiplayer, first of all, but the whole idea of VR is, yes, it's supposed to be an isolating experience in the sense that it's supposed to basically make you feel as though you're transported into a different world. That's called immersion. Last time I checked, when you play Gears 5 single player, is that not what you're trying to achieve? Is that not what the Coalition is trying to achieve with Halo Infinite's, campaign? Is that not what you're going to be trying to achieve? Is that not what 343 is trying to achieve? They're trying to achieve immersion, and that immersion sometimes means, you're going to have to experience it alone. And there's nothing wrong with that. This response, specifically that first thing he says, he really should have thought that out more, because to me, that's like him basically saying, I'm about multiplayer, microtransactions-filled games with, that are all about the live service, and I'm just not really a big fan of single-player games because they're just too isolating. Like, come on. That's ridiculous. Like, I can't believe this is what Phil Spencer had to say about Xbox. Now, him talking about the Xbox customer base not wanting VR, well, maybe there's a reason for that, Phil. Maybe the reason why is because back in, 2016, you announced Project Scorpio, and one of the things you announced alongside of it was the highest fidelity console VR experience, and that just never came. You just literally never talked about it again. So maybe any of those customers who were waiting for that just gave up on it and said, I'm going to go get a PlayStation Pro and PSVR because or an HTC Vive or an Oculus or something along those lines. And so I fully agree with what Shuhei Yoshida is saying here, where, I mean, he's just basically saying, like, hey, this is what we've done. And I think what Shuhei Yoshida is really just trying to say here is, look, like, you got to be willing to take risks. Because I don't necessarily know that PlayStation fans were crying out for VR. I mean, maybe they were, but I highly doubt they were. But Sony said, you know what, let's find out. Let's take this risk. Let's check ourselves. And that's exactly what they did. They just jumped into the market and said, you know what, VR potentially seems like something we could be heavily involved in and we could maybe find some success with. And so they said, let's give it a shot. Let's give it our all. And now they are currently the market leader. Granted, the VR market in general is not the biggest of markets. There's still a lot of room to grow. And I think that the biggest reason for that has to do with the actual tech itself. I don't think there's anything actually wrong with VR, as Phil kind of tries to make it sound with his comment here, like it's an isolating experience and who wants that. No, I think a lot of people, especially those who've played it, I've never played VR, but I will tell you that I've seen so many people on my channel tell me, like, PSVR is amazing and you have to try it. It's one of these things where you have to experience it for yourself to really understand it. And, the idea that could improve over time, that gets me excited. VR is something I certainly plan to embrace whenever Sony reveals their second version of it, the second generation of PSVR. Certainly something I am going to be interested in, especially when it's paired with the PlayStation 5. But I think that is one of the biggest obstacles that Sony and other companies who have pursued VR very heavily have faced, is just the tech side, right? Like, I've heard that PSVR is a little bit cumbersome at times. It's definitely, you can tell it's a first-gen product. There's a lot of wires. It can be a little bit annoying to set up at times. But overall, I've heard the experience is amazing, and it's nice to see that Sony is committed to it. Something I do want to point out here too as well is that according to Super Data, and this article is relatively old, but it says here that VR grew 30% in 2018 thanks to PSVR. Says that according to Super Data's Q4 2018 XR market report, Sony's PlayStation VR became the market leader during the holiday quarter, selling 700,000 units, the largest number of headsets sold across any category, beating out Oculus Go and HTC Vive as well as Oculus Rift. So there you go. I mean, Sony is finding success here, and this is why I just don't understand Phil Spencer's comments. To me, it just seems like the numbers aren't there. I mean, he does kind of mention in his quote here towards the end that he sees the numbers of VR users on PC and how the volume just isn't there for them. And I don't know. I mean, how do you expect to grow a market if you don't even try, right? Like, you have to try to grow the market. And I sure hope for Phil Spencer's sake here that, he's right about what he's saying, because I don't think he is. I think that him basically saying, like, this is another area where PlayStation is pursuing it. That PlayStation is going to be going in hard with their next version of PlayStation VR paired with the PlayStation 5. You already know that. You already know that the software is going to be there. They're going to have the games, and the tech is most likely going to be vastly, vastly improved over what we currently have. And it's just going to be a real shame that the competition that's supposed to be there with Xbox and Project Scarlet, that's just an area where they're just like, nah, we're not really interested in that. We're more interested in the 2.6 billion people who have phones in their pockets and making them Xbox customers by any means necessary. And to me, that's just like, I mean, I guess, pursue what you want. Again, I don't want to make it sound like I know better than Phil, because I don't. But one thing I do know for sure is that I think Sony's doing it right here. They're the ones that are taking risks. I mean, I've heard of some amazing games like Astrobot, right, on PSVR that, like, people have literally told me, like, you need to buy PSVR just to experience this game. And eventually I hope to in the long run. But there's a lot of people, I guarantee you, that when they first heard about virtual reality and they, were PlayStation fans, they were probably like, maybe that could be something cool. And then Sony announces that they're getting involved and they're making PSVR, and suddenly it's like, well, I already have a PlayStation 4 or a PS4 Pro or whatever, or I plan on getting one, so maybe I'll give it a shot, maybe this will be something new. And then they buy it and they experience it and they're like, wow, this is actually amazing. Like, the potential here is through the roof. That's exciting, man. Like, what if Sony had that same attitude and they're just like, it's too risky. We're not going to bother with that. They started at zero. That's the thing. Like, PlayStation VR started at zero. So did Xbox. So does everything else. So I just don't really understand this response that Phil Spencer's given here. To me, it just sounds a little bit like a cop-out. It sounds like it's just something that they don't want to get involved in because they just don't believe in it. They just don't believe that VR will ever be something that will be embraced by a bigger, more mainstream audience. And because of that, Microsoft just has no intention of trying to pursue it, which is unfortunate because that ultimately means less competition. But we're going to have to wait to see what ends up happening. Who knows? Maybe Sony will find a huge breakthrough or have a huge breakthrough with the second generation of PSVR next gen with the PlayStation 5. Something tells me that if that does happen, Phil Spencer is going to regret having this stance on VR. But whether or not that does happen, I think the point we need to kind of highlight here, and I want to end the video with this, is that this is just another area where Sony proves that they're willing to take risks and attempt to figure things out, right? Like, Sony had no idea whether or not they were going to be successful with VR, and they couldn't anticipate that they would be the market leader, but here they are, and that's a good thing because it means they're going to push harder going forward. And for anybody who is a fan of VR, or for anybody who is looking forward to the second version of PSVR, that's a great thing. Anybody who is hoping to get VR on Xbox, however, seems like you are not going to be getting that anytime soon, which is unfortunate. But that does it for the video, guys. Be sure to let me know your thoughts about this down in the comments below. Leave the video a like if you did enjoy it. Really helps it out. Subscribe to the channel if you're new, haven't already, and hit the bell notification icon so you never miss an upload. And feel free to share this video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.